Yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office released its report on raising the minimum wage. And for the second time in 1 month, Republicans are out front embracing the work of an agency they haven't always been so sweet on.
Boy, the CBO's been busy.
The Congressional Budget Office predicting 500,000 Americans could lose their jobs if the minimum wage goes up.
You might get a raise when it comes to the minimum wage, but that's counting on the fact that you still have a job.
Is the president's push for a higher minimum wage kaput?
Conservatives are out in full force, trumpeting part of the latest Congressional Budget Office report on the minimum wage. It's just their latest effort to crush the growing movement for a minimum wage increase.
Recently, they said today, gosh, if you did minimum wage, one impact is going to be you'll have fewer jobs.
It's pretty clear what they said yesterday could cost up to 1 million jobs.
But while the right wing was out spreading the gospel of the CBO, they've left out that in the same report, the CBO estimates that increasing the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour would raise almost 1 million people out of poverty and would raise the incomes of 16.5 million low-wage workers in an average week. But what's been left out by conservatives isn't as interesting as what is being expressed, and that's a newfound interest in what the CBO has to say. But it wasn't always this way.
And we got to do away with the CBO. They are not fair.
If you're serious about real health reform, abolish the Congressional Budget Office. It is a dishonest institution.
Where you get your information and how accurate it is and what the track record is very important, and CBO's track record on this kind of stuff is abysmal.
Well, CBO says this, CBO says this. Well, because CBO uses some pretty strange accounting conventions that aren't used anywhere else in the world. Here in Washington, D.C. I mean, any place else in the world, you'd be in jail.
Look, times have changed. Now that conservatives are endorsing CBO reports, I think we're going to see some real movement on Capitol Hill, starting with immediately ending austerity. After all, the CBO said the sequester, which the GOP has fought to extend, could cost up to 1.6 million jobs. So how about ending the madness, John Boehner? Or immigration reform, which has passed the Senate last year, but is yet to be brought up for a vote in the House. CBO said passing the Senate's immigration bill would grow the economy and shrink the deficit. So don't you think it's time for a vote, Eric Cantor? And then there's extending unemployment insurance, a bill Republicans in the Senate have blocked for months. The CBO found it would increase GDP and increase employment. So what do you say, Mitch McConnell? Over the past 36 hours, conservatives have decided to care about the employment prospects of low-wage workers, disingenuously using the CBO to beat up on the president and defend big business. But don't forget, if conservatives actually cared about the employment prospects of low-wage workers, there are a lot of real ways they could show it. And joining me now is economist Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. And Dean, there's a lot of folks reacting, economists reacting to the CBO's projection today. You've got Joseph Stiglitz, who says the analysis underestimated the benefits and overestimated the costs in several respects. Lawrence Katz of Harvard said the budget office had used a lot of off-the-shelf estimates. If it had emphasized findings of higher quality studies, it would have found a smaller or negligible impact on total employment. What's your feeling?
Well, I agree with that sentiment to some extent. I think it's worth actually looking at the report because, you made some of the points here. It's, there's a lot of very positive points here about the minimum wage increase where they sided with its proponents. For example, big argument, some of the opponents of raising the minimum wage, they go, oh, it's a bunch of kids that work after school at McDonald's. They said no. Only about 12% of the people who would be benefited are teenagers. So for the most part, we're talking about adults here. Also, they added, many of us have pointed out a spillover effect. They said in total as many as 25 million workers would see higher wages as a result of this pay increase. Also, as you had almost 1 million people being lifted out of poverty, most of the gains go to people who are near the poverty within 2 or 3 times the poverty level. So there were a lot of positives there. Now, the thing the Republicans are running on is job loss. There's a lot of research, and Professor Stiglitz and Katz both referred to that, indicating no job loss. We can't rule out there'll be some job loss, but it's important to understand what's going on here. It's not as though, let's take their number, 500,000. It's not as though 500,000 people are going to lose their jobs in the sense the employers get out of here.
Right.
Mostly what we're talking about is that employers aren't going to be making hires they otherwise would have made. So they see business expand and they would have hired someone, they put it off a little bit, or someone leaves and they don't replace them.
And this gets to this kind of Lucy in the football dynamic with these policy fights that drives me crazy, where, you know, you get conservatives who will say, oh, well, this is, I see the sort of smart conservatives I read and follow saying, look, this is a very inefficient way of helping people at the bottom of the wage scale. We should do, you know, X, Y, and Z, expand the earned income tax credit even more, have some kind of guaranteed basic income. Of course, if you ever push for those things, they're going to find reasons to defeat that too.
It sounds like the Republicans are going to oppose whatever is going to help low-wage workers. They're going to find a reason to oppose it.
In terms of that momentum, we two headlines that caught my eye today. You've got Walmart, which is apparently studying whether they're going to come out and support Walmart, if they're going to come out in support of a hike to the minimum wage. The logic of course, being their customers are people making the minimum wage, some significant percentage of them. And Gap today announcing it will raise its minimum wage from $9 in 2014 to $10. There is a business case for raising the minimum wage, isn't there?
Well, there is. I mean, much of the research points to, you know, when we say there's no job loss, part of the story there is that you reduce turnover, you'll increase productivity. Employers don't want to be chasing after workers. So if you give workers a reason to come back to work, if you have a higher minimum wage, they have a reason to stay at work. There's lower turnover, higher productivity. Another point I should just make on this story, you know, when we talk about, oh my God, 500,000 fewer jobs, basically the story, what that boils down to, what does that look like from the standpoint of the workers? You're going to be working fewer hours. Let's say it's roughly 2%. That's what we're talking about with the affected population. Roughly 2% fewer hours. You're going to get about 20% more for each hour you work. I think most people would say it's a good deal.
That's a good trade-off. Economist Dean Baker, thank you so much.